hysteria and speculation online right now as to whether the US dollar will continue.
This guy doesn't know what he's talking about. See, his whole theory is that the US dollar only got linked to oil in 1973. It became the only payment accepted by Saudi Arabia to purchase oil in 1973. He says it doesn't matter, if US loses petrodollar status, because before 1973, between 1944 to 1973, US dollar wasn't used to purchase oil and it was still the reserve currency of the world. So he's saying this petro-yuan business is no threat to the petrodollar. He's so wrong about that. That's because for the years before 1973, United States dollar was linked to gold, not to oil, but linked to gold, right? It was called the gold standard. And famously in 1971, Richard Nixon took the US dollar off the gold standard. And you know what happened to US dollar? When that happened, gold price went from about 35, 34 US dollars per ounce to about $800, $550, eventually to about $800 per ounce. What that means is basically US dollar has gone down in value 10x in that decade of the 70s, because now you need 10 times as much US dollars to buy the same 1 ounce of gold. So tell me again that US dollar doesn't depend on gold or oil. Now, if the US dollar is the reserve currency or not is actually hugely important for Bitcoin prices and gold prices and maybe stocks as well, because they're all priced in US dollars. And so naturally the question is, does the Chinese yuan have a chance of replacing the US dollar? Well, look at this. Today, this is today, right? March 28, 2023. China just completed its first yuan settlement trade in LNG, liquefied natural gas. With whom? It was with Total Energies from France. Now, we all know that France is one of the core members of NATO and of the European Union. So now they're starting to trade energy, not quite oil yet, but gas with China in Chinese yuan. And what about US's little buddy, Australia? Its biggest export to the world and to China is in iron ore. And guess what? It's now accepting iron ore payments in the Chinese yuan. Do you see a pattern here? But see, the linchpin to all of this here is oil, because everybody pretty much needs oil, right? To import oil. And what currency you use it in, then that currency you will need to store. See here, basically, these are some of the top oil exporting nations, which is Saudi Arabia, right? Russia, Iran, and Iraq, and some of those other countries in there as well. And guess what they're doing? They're all trying to form this BRICS alliance, which is Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, plus a few others, to try to counter the US dollar or petrodollar system. But as I said earlier, the linchpin to all of this is essentially in Saudi Arabia. They're the largest oil exporter in the world, and they're basically the head of OPEC, oil exporting, petroleum exporting countries. They've always had to rely on the United States for the past, 40, 50 years, because they've always been at war or in conflict with Iran. But guess who has now come out and guaranteed peace between them? That's right. I know you probably didn't hear this from any of your news because, it's all pretty much biased propaganda bullshit. So here's the thing. Saudi Arabia and Iran basically represents the Sunnis and the Shiites, the two largest Muslim belief systems in the world, right? The two largest segments of Islam. And basically, they represent something like 500 million to 1 billion people each on the planet. So this is a big deal. And they have been sort of at war for like a few hundred years, if not longer than that. And now they've just made peace, which means Saudis no longer really need protection against Iran. And guess who's going to be backing the Saudis if anyone tries to attack them? Yes, these two guys are brokering that peace deal. Now, I know a lot of people are going to get triggered by what I'm saying, but however, I'm just trying to tell you the facts, the truth out there, buddy. However, see, I'm not against the US petrodollar system. It has worked pretty well for the last 40 or 50 years, and there has been relative peace on this planet, unless you're from the Middle East or Vietnam or North Korea. Then there's been a lot of wars for you. However, there's been relative peace and trade between all these countries for the last 50 years, thanks to the US dollar and thanks to the US dollar petrodollar system. However, right now, have you found that in the last 5 or so years, the world is becoming increasingly unstable because of tensions between these two countries. So therefore, all these other countries are trying to find a way maybe to use half and half. Use the US petrodollar system, but have a fallback on the petro yuan or the BRICS system or whatever it is. It's not a black and white issue, right? I'm not exactly pro America or pro Russia or pro NATO or whatever here. I'm just trying to tell you guys the truth about what's happening in the world from an investment perspective. If this thing continues, there's either going to be a massive war because they will want to stop the petro yuan or the BRICS from forming and taking down the US dollar, or if the US dollar does lose its reserve currency status, then you're going to see Bitcoin and gold go mooning.